Got old uniforms? Wreaths by Nicole P. has the solution. Nicole, a veteran, handcrafts unique wreaths from military uniforms, a perfect tribute for your loved one's service. Commemorate special moments with personalized wreaths crafted by Nicole. No uniform, no problem. Wreaths by Nicole P. has every fatigue print ready for your custom creation. Explore wreath options at www.wreathsbynicolepee.com or message Nicole directly on Facebook. Wreaths by Nicole P. Preserving memories one wreath at a time. Honor the past, celebrate the present.
When I found out I was leaving the military, by the way, the military wasn't just a job for me. It was everything to me. I think I spent more time with my fellow soldiers and leaders in the military than I did my own family. So I was actually leaving my family. And so a lot of what I would consider to be post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that I should have been experiencing throughout all those years, they weren't really showing up. They were in some ways. Of course, being the career military guy that I was, I just told them I didn't need any of that stuff. Well, I started taking the advice of a lot of very smart leaders that were surrounding me, and they told me, well, before you start your med board, you need to go see somebody in mental health. And we started unpacking a lot of these things that happened when I was on active duty. And you know, for the first time, I think, and I don't even think I've been in tears since, but I was in tears when I started unpacking a lot of that stuff. Very, very hard to talk about those things.
Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast of military and veterans who refuse to be silenced. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, provide value and solutions, and to change the culture when it comes to mental health within the DoD organizations.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming back for another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today's guest is JJ, who is a retired U.S. Army veteran. He has a business called Victory Leadership Coaching that helps with organizational strategy and leadership development. He is married with 2 teenage children. And JJ, I am so excited to have you on today. We chit-chatted a little bit before we got started, and this is a first for you sharing this part of your story. So thank you for your vulnerability, for showing up here. And there's so many people I know that are going to relate and are going to be so appreciative of you just taking the time to come on here and share your story. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Yeah, this definitely isn't one of those things. Well, I've shared my story, but as I told you, I haven't done it where I was recorded. So
yeah,
I'm going to act like we're not being recorded while we're doing this.
All good. Just person to person conversation.
Thank you for having me on here, though. I mean, I think it's really, really good to make sure that we're having conversations around these things, because you never know. I've come a long way in my recovery from when I had my dark times, especially after I retired, to now. So people need to hear different versions of this story with every person, so that hopefully one resonates with them and they go get help, whatever that looks like.
Absolutely. So I'm going to pass it off to you to share your story with the people.
Okay, let's do it. So, okay, my name is JJ Hardy. There is a lot of trauma in my background, and there's a lot of positive things in my background. But honestly, for me, it kind of starts in my childhood. I'm not going to go really super in depth with it, but I will say that I came from broken home. So both my mother and my father were divorced around the time I was 1 year old. And, you know, there was a lot of abuse starting probably from the age of like 5 or 6 years old, both mentally and physically, all the way through my childhood up through my teenage years. I was actually homeless at the age of 16 for about 8 months. And that's because I left both of those environments. And so I've basically, in one form or another, until I got married in 2006, been on my own and taking care of business, and that has built me into a different kind of animal, which I'll go into a little bit later in my story. But when I started my military service in 2000, you know, it was very difficult for me. I had to leave home for the first time, and honestly, I was I won't call myself a lesser person, but I felt like a lesser person. And so for me to go into something where I didn't have any of a support system around me, none of my friends, which by the way were more important to me than my family at that point, although I still kind of supported them in one way or another, it was a very big step for me. And you know, I left almost immediately. I went to basic training and all of that stuff, and which by the way, I enjoyed. I learned at that point, I think, that I was kind of an adrenaline junkie. basic training was awesome. But, going through my military service, before my first deployment, it was a great experience for me because I had a lot of supportive people around me, which I wasn't used to. And by the way, people that challenged me and made me into more, because I was already kind of a pissed off individual. I came from households where, I didn't do anything right. I was kind of smacked around, pushed around, beaten up, told I wasn't very good, all that stuff. And in the military environment, it's not that, well, depending on who you get when you're working in the military, I know we all have those people that we know we don't model our behavior like, but there were many people there that showed me a different way to act because I went against everybody. I had UCMJ the first 2 years of service 3 different times. The only reason I didn't get kicked out is because they saw potential. Coming from a guy who spent 18 years in the Army, I don't even know how they put up with that crap. To be honest with you, why they kept me.
What were they for, if you don't mind me asking?
One was drugs. I got UCMJ for beating up another soldier. For honestly, he was just looking at me the wrong way. I don't even know what he said now. But it was, another one was somebody told me something that I didn't like, and it wasn't the thing that they told me. It was a person that I didn't like, and in front of everybody in the room, I kind of publicly screamed at him, called him names, and the whole 9 yards, and that was not a very smart thing to do, obviously. And that was the last time that happened, because at that point, not the person that initiated the UCMJ, but somebody else said, hey, look, I actually got transferred to another unit and I started working for this guy. He said, I can help this guy. I don't even know why somebody would want to do that, but that taught me something in my heart that I kept for the rest of my service. If I see somebody in need, I shouldn't knock them down. Maybe UCMJ is okay, but build them up while they're under punishment. And that has helped me. That person has been an inspiration throughout my entire career. And so I thank him for doing what he did. Anyway, so moving forward from that, I deployed. My very first deployment in 2004 was a combat deployment. I did convoy duty for probably the majority of that, while also working on an airfield, which that wasn't super stressful, except for there were some jerks in our unit, but that's just typical work stuff, whether you're in or out of the Army. But the convoy stuff was a little bit interesting. We had a few IEDs that hit some convoys we were on, took a lot of small arms fire, had a few RPGs we only lost a couple people that deployment, thank God, but those people were like brothers to me, and that has plagued me ever since, to be quite honest with you. And with the already existing stuff that I had going on upstairs, I think that it took me to a really low place. I was only a specialist when I came back from that deployment, and somehow or another somebody saw something in me when I got back and moved to another unit, because they decided to start sending me to Soldier of the Month boards and challenging me to study for that. And then I eventually went to the promotion board, and 9 months after I got back, I went back downrange as an E5, which was actually kind of an amazing experience. And that one I didn't leave the fob, but I did, and I'm going to keep locations and names and stuff like that out of it just because I think that's irrelevant. I actually had the underside of the trailer that I was living in was struck by an incoming, not rocket, but a mortar. And my trailer almost fell off. We had guys out in the convoy staging lot that were blown up right in front of us. Very, very hard to process that. We had a guy soldier who came back. I didn't know him real well. Came back from a convoy, and he had an issue where he got nervous right as he was going out the wire. And instead of pulling the cap off, lighting the flare, and then throwing the flare, he threw the cap and dropped the flare inside. And it was a nasty situation. But yeah, that's pretty much the most of stuff for that deployment. A lot of incoming on that deployment. It just kind of exemplified why some of these soldiers that are having trouble that never went outside the wire, their struggle is just as real as the struggle of the soldier. I've done both. I've been inside and outside of the wire, and I think some of the stuff that I had to deal with inside the wire was probably more traumatic.
And when you say the wire, just for people who don't know,
oh, the wire. So there are forward operating bases when you go downrange, and all that is a base, just like what you would see here in the United States. If you want to get in, you got to show your mission sheet, your proper identification, the whole 9 yards, just like you would here, except for stateside, you don't have to worry about a mission sheet, but it's just a base in the middle of Iraq. And so when we say outside the wire, that's like when you go outside of the base, which honestly is where most of the imminent threats take place, because the mortars and stuff that fly onto the fob, the base, they are kind of thrown everywhere. They don't actually know if they're hitting anything. They just know where the base starts, and they have a really good idea where there are a couple big things that might be towers and stuff like that they can see from outside the wire. But for the most part, they're just lobbing mortars on base, and they hope they hit something, and they know they do when they do, because later that day or the next day or whatever, it makes the news, or that it's called out on the radio or whatever. But yeah, that's the difference. That's what it means to be outside of the wire.
Thank you for explaining that.
Oh no, I hope I articulated that okay.
You did, yeah.
Okay. I did have a third deployment, but I was in a staff. I never left the base, and it was in a pretty well developed area, my third deployment. So nothing, it was all developmental stuff, that positive things that happened on that. But I'll fast forward to, believe it or not, like 10 years later, after that third deployment, things started slowing down a little bit, and I found out I was to be medically processed out of the Army because I have arthritis in almost every major joint in my body. I wonder why that happens. But no, I saw a picture one time on social media where there was a soldier in full battle rattle, and he said, what do you mean my back pain's not service connected? No,
I know where they come up with this stuff.
No, the things that soldiers get denied for when it comes to VA claims, it just absolutely boggles my, well, but when I found out I was leaving the military, by the way, the military wasn't just a job for me. It was everything to me. I think I spent more time with my fellow soldiers and leaders in the military than I did my own family. And from 2006 on, I had a family. I now have 2 teenage kids, and I've been married now for almost 18 years. Actually, next month it'll be 18 years. So they put up with quite a bit during my military service. So I was actually leaving my family. And so a lot of what I would consider to be post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that I should have been experiencing throughout all those years, they weren't really showing up. They were in some ways. I had been referred to therapy for a couple of things, but it was more like quick anger and stuff that's related to just how you react to things. And of course, being the career military guy that I was, I just told them I didn't need any of that stuff. Well, I started taking the advice of a lot of very smart leaders that were surrounding me, and they told me, well, before you start your med board, you need to go see somebody in mental health. And we started unpacking a lot of these things that happened when I was on active duty. And for the first time, I think, and I don't even think I've been in tears since, but I was in tears when I started unpacking a lot of that stuff. Very, very hard to talk about those things. I don't think I'll go into great detail with hardly anybody, because it's just some of the things you once you say it again, you can't unsee it. And it's really important to go get treatment for those things if you're listening this and you're not, because honestly speaking, I don't know about the one-on-one therapy, but when I started, even before I got out in 2018, when I started going to group therapy and I was listening to other people share their story, it was very beneficial. Well, when I medically retired in 2018 and I left and went back to Virginia, I went to the VA there to continue my treatment. And I'm going to be honest with you, was not happy with it. The very first thing they did, and I was ignorant and what I considered to be a little bit dumb, because I went against my better judgment. And that very first appointment I had in mental health, they recommended that I take this medication, this medication, this medication, and this medication. I did it. I stopped within about 90 days after I started, because I wasn't the same person anymore. I look at any injury, whether it's arthritis or if it's a broken ankle or whatever the case, if you are masking the problem and just putting a band-aid on it, how are you supposed to know if that problem gets worse? So I went back and I said, there's got to be a better way. And he's like, well, we'll just change all your medications. And I said, well, I'm not going to take medication. And he prescribed it to me anyway. I thank God to this day that I found the DAV in Hampton, Virginia, because they had support groups. I stopped my mental health altogether over at the VA because it was just, they wanted me to talk in detail to a person who has never served and never been in that situation about things that they couldn't possibly fathom. They just say they understand, which, by the way, they don't know a damn thing. They just know in a book what it means to the psyche or whatever. And when I found the DAV and I talked to people who, by the way, were not just experiencing this from the Iraq War, but from the Gulf War, and then also back in Vietnam, talking about the same problems that they're having in their personal life and how they're turning the PTSD that they have into a strength. My dark years, they started going away. My dark years were from 2018 to about 2020. I broke completely out of my shell just because I was surrounding myself with a bunch of people that are going through similar things to what I was going through. They were screaming people into a corner at home in what's supposed to be the safe place for everybody over stupid things. They were just going off the wall, punching walls, throwing things across the room, just what the average person would probably call a very childish reaction. I learned was actually post-traumatic stress disorder at its ugliest. I thank God to this day that I never laid a hand on a member of my family, because there were some people there that were. And, community, in my opinion, has probably been the best thing for recovery. And ever since I started my business, that was the first thing I did, was I created a community even around that, because I now believe that community is so important to getting through some of these things and moving forward in a healthy way. You can move forward in an unhealthy way if you're surrounded by the wrong people, but getting a group of people that are willing to help solve the problems within themselves and move forward in a healthy way. If you're around that mindset and you're working through these problems as a team, you can get anything accomplished.
I love
that was my story.
I love it. No, I was waiting to see if you were done yet, because your story to me is very intriguing, and I'm really glad that you talked about group therapy. And I'll tell you why. When I went to the VA and I first said, "Hey, I'm struggling with depression, anxiety, all these things," and they themselves sounded apprehensive about group therapy, and I've never been to group therapy myself. And so I think when someone like me thinks about group therapy, it can be kind of intimidating, because it's one of those things where it's like, well, you don't know what you're going to walk into. And then I think the way that my mind processes it is, are my problems going to seem minute compared to someone else's? And so then it keeps me from going. And so I would love if you would just expand on what that group therapy experience is like. Like, is it like what you see AA as on TV? Or is it, I guess I don't even know what to really compare it to, but if you could just tell the listeners what that group therapy experience is like for someone like me, especially, who is a little intimidated by it and doesn't know what it's like.
So the very first thing I'll say about that is, just like I was saying a couple minutes ago, you can go to the wrong group. You'll know that immediately. I went to more than one, right? I went to a couple group therapy things at the VA, and it was okay. It was run by a person at the front of the room. That doesn't work. That it's good to have somebody there as a mediator, but when you're new and they ask you to share what you're there for, and if you're willing to share any of your story, and you do, and the very first thing that happens afterward is somebody in there, and this is what got me talking more. They said, it's okay to have problems, and it's okay to be going through what you're going through and feel the way you feel. We all went through that when we first started. As soon as I heard that, I don't think I even thought about any of my problems the same way anymore. As a matter of fact, there was one time that I even mentioned that my kids left crushed up crayons on the floor, and it triggered me immediately. I went and started screaming at them. And another person said, "Oh my gosh, there's nothing that triggers me worse than seeing Legos on the floor." I was just like, I'm not crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy how much just feeling heard and related to helps from a therapeutic standpoint. And so that's what I love about this group therapy concept that you're bringing up, because I don't know that a lot of guests on my show have really talked about group therapy. And so it's kind of an interesting perspective to bring to the table, because I think that you mentioned that you can go to the wrong place. I think that the way that someone reacts after hearing someone share their vulnerable moment or vulnerable story can determine, how much that person wants to continue doing something, right? And so to be in a supportive environment where, maybe I share a little bit of my story and then I feel heard as opposed to feeling judged. And I think people can experience this on one-on-one therapy too. I mean, that's what makes really therapy in general intimidating for a lot of people, is that you're being vulnerable with either one person that's a stranger or a group of people who are strangers, but how is that person reacting, or how are these people reacting? And so you said that the DAV in your area had something. How did you get connected to that?
Somebody that I was talking to sitting out in front of the VA waiting for somebody to pick me up after I had surgery said, "Have you gone to the DAV?"
Wow.
And I said, "Well, I've heard of that, but tell me more about that." Well,
Yeah.
I went to the DAV, blah, 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 blah. And they told me everything I needed to know. And I'll be honest with you, even after that, I didn't go for probably about 3 months because the idea was intimidating. Same thing you're saying right now.
Yep.
You know, when you go through the VA system, it's almost like going through the military medical system. You know, you get one psychologist. Well, if that person is a resident, or if that person is there on a short amount of time and they have to leave for whatever reason, because it's just a job, right? I mean, they could get promoted or they could move somewhere else. Well, then now you're stuck with having to start from scratch with another human being. And it's so hard. So when they told me about this new place to go to do something that I've already tried, which is group therapy through the VA, you know, I was almost like, you know what? I don't want to do that. But, you know, then you leave and the most dangerous place in the world is in your own head.
Yeah.
So you think about it. And then you think about it, and then every time something happens at home that's not necessarily a desired thing that you would like to have happen again, you think about, well, how can I get help? And when you just have that running through your mind all the time because you want to be better and you work on yourself and all these other things all the time, then you know, trying something new is almost, it gets to a point where it's not an option. So I went ahead and I paid my lifetime DAV membership, and I just started showing up to this group, and it was really, really, I'm so glad I did. And, you know, don't get, for you specifically, Rachel, don't get discouraged by the idea that you show up to one and it's a bunch of jerks.
Yeah.
We're veterans. We have that in our blood. That's kind of what we are anyway. The grumpy veterans. I mean, that phrase is out there for a reason.
Yeah.
But,
go ahead.
You got to find your people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's good to note, though, that there are multiple resources in really every area. I mean, where I live is considered very rural. And one of the things that I'm actually working on in my community is connecting more of these resources that exist to the people that need them in the veteran and military community. But the fact that you went through the DAV and not like your standard VA or medical system, I know people that will use the vet center and they love it. I know people that use, apps on their phone and love it. I mean, there's multiple resources out there. It's just finding the one that works. And unfortunately, we live in a day and age where there are these multiple options, whether that be on an electronic device or in person. I'm still very much an in-person kind of person. So yeah, it's comforting to know that there are options out there. And thank you for sharing that experience with group therapy. There is a part in your story that you talked about that it was kind of a reoccurring theme that I found really interesting. And when you talked about your UCMJs and how you got in trouble for drugs and just snapping on people and things that realistically in today's military would get someone kicked out after, drugs, that's like a zero tolerance thing.
Yeah.
I think I know one person that popped on a drug test and is still in for whatever reason. But, I think what stood out to me the most was this theme of someone believing in you. And so can you, for context, I know you mentioned some years in your story, but what time frame was this year-wise when you had these UCMJs, roughly, if you remember?
Yeah, 2001 to just before 2003.
Okay.
Three of them in just under 2 years.
Yeah. And I ask because I think that there's this disconnect in the military today where people are trying to figure out the leadership thing, right? And I love talking to combat vets. I love talking to Vietnam era vets and, people who have experienced different forms of leadership throughout the different years of the military and just trying to figure out this piece of like, what is this missing puzzle piece in today's military that is causing leadership to be so toxic that people they're just deciding to get out and not continue serving. And it's interesting to hear about this concept of someone believed in me. Like I was an asshole, but someone believed in me. Whereas today it would be like, oh, no, you're an asshole. We're just going to kick you out because we think you're a piece of shit and good luck on the outside. And so I don't know if there's anything more you want to expound on that, just that thought process or that idea, this concept of someone believing in you, or maybe something that stood out in your service that you think would be relevant to today's leaders?
Yes. So my business, I do leadership training and coaching because I've been blessed to have a lot of people teach me a lot of things and then go get a lot of education around leadership, specifically because it was such a passion of mine. These people would explain this concept to me, and I'm just like, that's all it takes to really create influence, is that you care about people. Well, so when I think of leadership, I think about, a what can I do for you, not a what you can do for me, not just a way of treating all of your people, but the way you think. If people were to adopt that way of thinking, when somebody is reaching out for help, you're more likely to help them regardless of what they have done to cause you difficulty. You got to overlook that, because not everybody has a good day every day. I encountered something where I was a young E5, where one of my soldiers, his wife told him that if he didn't come home by 5 o'clock, that she was going to divorce him. Well, I didn't know that. He didn't say that to me all day long. And it just so happened that, the first sergeant put out some stuff that we had to stay late that day. Well, as soon as that happened, what do you think he did?
He wasn't too happy about it, I'm pretty sure.
He was not too happy. So, this sticks out because this was the one time that I had to make a difference in somebody's life. And instead of chastise him for going off the handle, it's the military. I grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him into a room and shut the door. But I'm like, okay, now fucking say what you got to say. Do it now, because you only have my attention for a few minutes. And I just let him say what he had to say. And he was so mad and so insubordinate. But I looked at him afterwards and I'm like, you're not normally like this. Something happened. And he opened up and told me what was going on. And I'm like, well, if that's really the case, then you're going to go home. But people are always looking for the easy button. When something, it doesn't matter if it's a person or not, if something gives you trouble, your first reaction is to either tamp that thing or that person down or get rid of them. And that's not the way. I mean, you got to take people used to always laugh at me when I said this, but you got to take the hard right, not the easy left. You always got to take the most difficult path, because obviously in the long run, if you take the most difficult path, then the easy way comes later on after you learn the lessons from that difficulty. And the way that the reason that applies in leadership is because with people, they're not easy. If you look at them as something that's expendable, then they're going to be, and you're going to ruin people's lives. But if you look at them as an asset that can be developed, then it's hard to do that, by the way. It's hard to look at somebody as a person, as an asset, when you're charged to use them to do a job by your higher ups, and they're under your chain of concern or chain of command, depending on what your rank is. But if you do it, you reap the benefits from that. And because then you don't just have a following of people, you have people that would literally probably do anything that you ask them to do and be happy about it. And that's the missing component, in my opinion.
I love it. And it's so true, because I think in conversations that I had with, or maybe not conversations that I had, but I think just observing when I served active, and I was in from 2015 to 2021, I'd say that unfortunately there was very few leaders that I saw when someone was having a bad day or a bad month, or sometimes longer, because let's be real, if someone doesn't feel supported, a bad day can turn into a domino effect, right? It can change their attitude altogether. I didn't see a lot of leaders that took that time to say, hey, like this isn't you. What's going on? I think there's a little bit of discomfort in that conversation, though.
Of course.
Especially for those, I would say the E6, E7, kind of that, getting into, now we're more senior enlisted, and I have this persona that I need to portray because,
No, you don't.
on one hand, we have to look good, right? I wasn't ever E6 or E7, I was an E5. So I got to be in that defiant role, right? But, I think that kind of the challenges that I saw from the outside looking in for these people that were serving in these ranks was that I have to uphold a certain quote unquote standard that the chief's mess or, the whatever, my peers in my rank around me expect me to uphold But at the same time, like, I think there might be a bit of moral injury with wanting to still hear the people that they are leading, essentially, right? Like the lower enlisted. And so I'm curious if you have any advice for someone who might be listening to this podcast that is serving in the E6 or E7 in rank and knows, like, yeah, I get it. If someone's having a bad day, the thing to do is to listen to them, right? But then there's also the standard that has to be upheld, and there's also this mission that has to be done. And I imagine that for someone in that position, there's a lot of things that they're kind of balancing in their head of like, what makes the most sense? Because I don't want to jeopardize my career. I don't want to jeopardize the mission, but I also don't want to jeopardize the life of someone who might be struggling or having a bad year or, whatever have you. Any advice?
Yes, that is why it is crucial to create an environment, a culture that's what the priority is leadership. When you take care of your downtrace leaders and you tell them that the expectation is that they treat their people like people and take care of them the same way that you take care of them. I think I said that right. Then, and you create a culture all the way down, and then you require them to foster that even on their small teams. Then, it create the benefits take care of themselves. I will say this, there's about probably between 5 and 15% of every workforce that has some knuckleheads. That's just the way it's going to be. Always. You're always going to have those people that are just there for the paycheck and they don't want to do anything that anybody tells them to do. But we're not talking about them. We're talking about the ones that are primarily, they do well most of the time, but then they have this month, like you said, or these few days or whatever, where they are just struggling. They get to borderline insubordinate and all these other things. If you're a senior leader in the military, it is your responsibility to know your people and take care of them. It's in your creed, okay? It's in the NCO creed. If you're not doing it, you're not doing your dang job. And if you want to help the suicide rate, shame on you for not paying attention and upholding the creed that you have to memorize as part of your position. So start doing it. It's not hard. Well, it is hard, but it's not hard. All you have to do is care. If you don't know what servant leadership is, it's putting the welfare of other people before your own, making sure they're taken care of so they can take care of what they need to do and all that other stuff. That way your mission, when they come back from taking care of their personal crap, they will absolutely take care of the mission. They will take care of you and they'll take care of that person to their left and their right. If you're not doing that stuff, if you're not taking care of your people, then shame on you. I have no sympathy for those people that have their self-interest only in mind.
Yeah. And I want to add to that too, that if you're listening to this and there is discomfort in that, then that's a good thing. That means that you're growing. Mm-hmm. I encourage you to sit with that discomfort and embrace it and figure out why it feels uncomfortable. And maybe that is an area of your leadership or personal development that you need to work on. And there's incredible people like JJ who have the ability to provide support and help out. And we'll get to your business side here in a second, yep. JJ, but I wanted to shift the conversation just a little bit because of the climate in the world right now with the military. We are starting to see more military in these combat operations again, right? Like the globe has kind of shifted, and it's not that combat has ever really stopped. We've always had US presence in combat areas. It just depends on what the news wants to portray. But sure. I'm curious, as someone who has been in a combat environment before, how can people who haven't been in a combat environment or have not served in the military support that veteran or active duty service member who is coming back from combat?
So your question was, if you've never been in combat, yep. How can you support somebody who has?
Right. Because I served in the Navy, right? But I never served in combat. And so what I found interviewing combat vets is that it's a very, very different world. And mm-hmm. So, and I think even in communities, people are always trying to figure out how can I support the veterans? That's a question I get a lot. And I know my answer to how do you support veterans, but that's as someone who hasn't been in combat. So I'm curious that as people are now, we're seeing this influx in veterans who are starting to see these horrific pieces of combat again. I mean, it's just coming up more in the world just with everything going on. And I think people would be curious to know how to best support someone who is coming back from that, whether they are a veteran or they're still active and just came back from a deployment.
So the main thing I can say about that is that person's not going to be the same person they were when they left. They are not going to react to things the same way. Don't tell them you understand, because they're a veteran that's been through some hard stuff. They don't want to hear that crap. You don't understand. If you understood, you wouldn't be saying I understand. Don't say thank you for doing all that stuff. I mean, I don't know. You need to be understanding. You're not going to have a person that is gonna cry when somebody passes away necessarily. You're not going to have that person that when they see somebody complaining because their headphones broke, that they feel sympathy for that person. You're not going to have a person that when they say, I don't like this food, and they throw out the plate, that will look at that person and say something nice to them. When you deal with third world issues, the issues back here at home don't seem like much. And so we react to things in a very unfavorable way sometimes, because we've gained a new appreciation of life, and we have dealt with things and it's not necessarily the right way to think about things. And I'm not making excuses for that veteran, but your first world issues really don't mean anything in the bigger scheme of things in their mind. I'm coming to terms with that. I have to meet people where they are in my coaching business, but you also have to meet a veteran where they are. And if they get upset about something, or they don't act like they would normally act before they left, you got to give them their space and let them know it's going to be okay. Don't say I get it. Don't say I understand, because you don't.
You articulated that so well. And I think that really goes for anyone that's dealing with something that we don't understand. I've heard that from, even people that are dealing with deep, deep depression, and hearing someone say, I understand, is just probably one of the worst things you can tell someone.
Yes.
But yeah, just being there and supporting and meeting them where they're at. I love how you said that, which again can for some people be uncomfortable because they don't understand, but maybe that's an area to explore more, how people can support by having conversations when someone's ready to have those conversations, because again, not every veteran, combat or non-combat, is ready to talk about the things that they went through, and that's okay.
Well, and I'd like to say one more thing about that. There's another. So PTSD is not something that shows up in everyday life. And if you come back and you've dealt with horrific things, if you've ever been yelled at by another person, how did that affect you? Did you think about it after you left? Well, multiply that by a lot. That's why these suicides are happening, because people can't live in their own thoughts. And so they think the easiest way out is just to end it. So if you really want to help these combat vets, especially the ones that are going now, because it's a new generation, and I hate to say it, not as mentally tough, to be quite honest with you, you have to pay attention to them, and don't necessarily get after them for acting differently. But when they start having more frequent negative interactions throughout the course of every day's work, make sure you can find somebody that can relate to them and let them have a conversation, or get them to a place or something that can help them. The worst thing you could do is try to ignore it, because it's not going to go away, and you're going to lose a member in your ranks.
That's powerful. And do you have any words or advice for specific to the combat vet, either served in the past or might be getting out soon?
We are told to suck it up and drive on. Drink water, change your socks. I can go on and on and on and on. This is not a problem that's going to be solved by ignoring it either, in your own foxhole, in your own mind. So please get help. If the VA is not it, you can go to the DAV. You can go to the American Legion. You can talk to a VSO and see if there are any community programs out there. There's all kinds of stuff. You can go to the Soldier Center. You can still call Military One Source. Do something. Get a referral to a place that can help you, because if you ignore it, it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
So true. Well, thank you for that. And with that, I really want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit more about what you do with your business. And I know we kind of briefly touched on it when we talked about the leadership thing earlier, but now's your time. Tell the people how they can find you. What is it that you do with your business, first of all, and then how they can find you and how they can support you?
Well, so I don't have a lot of one-on-one clients, because I like to focus on businesses. But the people that are in this audience, they need to know what I do one-on-one. So any of those challenges that Rachel brought up earlier, if you're having problems with difficult conversations or the mindset to serve, or if you just cannot get the buy-in of your people and you're in a management position and you never had any training surrounding that, that is what I do on the one-on-one level. And if you want to take that to the business level, I do group leadership training on the principles surrounding servant leadership, and I'm a logistics guy. So systems and processes for growing businesses that haven't taken the time to put those into place yet. That's the other thing that I do. I call that organizational strategy.
Awesome. And do you have a website?
Yes, you can go to victoryleadershipcoaching.com, or if you go into Google and just type in hashtag veteran leader trainer, all one word, veteran leader trainer, it'll pull up everything.
Oh, you got a hashtag.
Yes, that was
Fancy.
a strategy I learned from somebody.
That's awesome. No, that's great. That's great. What a better way to, really put yourself out there branding wise. I love it.
Yes.
Well, JJ, thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing such great insights into your world and the world of other combat vets. I think I learn a little more every time I talk to someone who has served in a combat role. And it's interesting to me, the lessons that I learned just in these short conversations, these 45-minute to hour-long conversations. So I'm so deeply appreciative of you just taking the time out of your day to share your story and your knowledge with the listeners on this platform. And I'm just going to end it today with asking you if you have any last words or pieces of advice for the broader audience listening to this podcast.
Nothing really that I haven't said already, but mental health is something that is so important. I keep it at my core because I have and still continue to struggle with it so much. You would never know it by talking to me. So just know that there are people out there, they call it the invisible sickness, whatever you want to call it. But it's that one thing that people that have been through a traumatic experience, not just veterans, are suffering through, that you won't see until it's too late. So make sure that if you find somebody and they've opened up to you about something, that you show that person love and support and grace. They deserve it. They really, really do. And if they don't ever have somebody reaching a hand out to them, it could be the last interaction that person has. So always remember that.
Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. With your support, we are able to increase awareness of the mental health issues affecting service members and veterans today, with the goal of creating positive change. If you got value from this episode, please take 30 seconds to subscribe and share this episode within your own network. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.